In the depths of a foreign prison cell, Sarah Chen counted the scratches on the concrete wall. 7 marks. 7 days since her own government had left her to die. 7 days since she discovered the truth that would shake the foundations of international intelligence forever. What happens when a decorated agent realizes that the real enemy isn't the one holding the keys to her cell, but the people who sent her there? What happens when betrayal becomes the catalyst for the most daring counterintelligence operation in modern history? This is the story of how one woman's abandonment became the weapon that brought down an entire network of corruption. This is the story of 7 days that changed everything. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone thinks is dead. Sarah Chen pressed her ear against the cold metal door of her cell, straining to hear the conversation in the corridor outside. The voices were muffled, speaking in rapid Mandarin, but she caught enough words to understand they were discussing her fate. After 3 days of interrogation, her captors were growing impatient with her silence. The underground facility somewhere in rural China felt like a tomb. No windows, no natural light, just the constant hum of fluorescent bulbs and the echo of footsteps on concrete. Sarah had been here for exactly 72 hours, though it felt like weeks. Every muscle in her body ached from sleeping on the narrow metal bench that served as her bed. She thought back to the mission briefing in Langley just 2 weeks ago. Director Marcus Webb had personally handed her the assignment, his weathered face serious as he explained the importance of retrieving the stolen intelligence files from a double agent named Lu Wei. The files contained the identities of every American asset operating in Southeast Asia, information that could get dozens of people killed if it fell into the wrong hands. Webb had assured her that extraction protocols were in place. If anything went wrong, a team would be ready to pull her out within 24 hours. She had believed him. Sarah had worked for the CIA for 8 years, completing dozens of successful operations across 3 continents. She trusted the system that had never failed her before. The mission had started smoothly enough. Sarah had entered China under the cover of being a cultural exchange coordinator, her documents perfect, her backstory rehearsed to perfection. She had made contact with Lu Wei at a crowded marketplace in Shanghai, following the predetermined signals and code phrases they had established through encrypted communications. Lu Wei was a nervous man in his 50s, constantly looking over his shoulder as they walked through the maze of vendor stalls selling everything from exotic fruits to counterfeit electronics. He carried himself like someone who knew he was living on borrowed time. When they finally found a quiet corner near a noodle stand, he had whispered the location where the files were hidden. The drop point was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Sarah had arrived at the specified time, using every surveillance detection technique she knew to ensure she wasn't being followed. The building was exactly as Lu Wei had described it, a decaying structure that had once been part of a textile factory. Inside, behind a loose brick in the north wall, she found a waterproof case containing 3 flash drives and a handwritten note. That's when everything went wrong. The lights had come on suddenly, blinding her after the darkness of the warehouse. Armed men emerged from behind shipping containers and concrete pillars, their weapons trained on her, before she could even reach for her own gun. There were at least 8 of them, members of China's Ministry of State Security, moving with the precision of a well-planned operation. As they forced her to her knees and zip-tied her hands behind her back, Sarah realized the horrible truth. This hadn't been a random discovery or the result of sloppy tradecraft. Someone had known exactly when and where she would be. Someone had set her up. The interrogation had begun almost immediately. They transported her to this underground facility in the back of a windowless van, the journey taking what felt like hours on winding rural roads. The interrogation room was sterile and white, equipped with cameras and recording equipment that suggested they were very interested in documenting whatever she might say. The lead interrogator introduced himself as Colonel Zhang, a thin man with sharp features who spoke excellent English. He knew details about her that should have been classified at the highest levels. He knew about her previous missions in Eastern Europe, her training at the farm, even personal details about her family back in California that made her blood run cold. Zhang had placed the flash drives on the metal table between them, along with photographs of her meeting with Lu Wei. The surveillance photos were crystal clear, taken from multiple angles with professional equipment. This wasn't the work of random street cameras or lucky accident. Someone had been watching the entire operation unfold. When Zhang asked her about her CIA handlers and the specifics of her mission, Sarah had given him nothing but her name, rank, and service number. But she could see in his eyes that he already knew the answers to his questions. The interrogation felt more like a performance, as if he was going through the motions for the benefit of the cameras. The worst part was the waiting. After each session, they would return her to the cell and leave her alone with her thoughts. Sarah kept expecting to hear the sound of helicopters overhead or explosions in the distance that would signal her rescue team had arrived. She imagined CIA operatives and Special Forces soldiers breaching the facility, fighting their way through the corridors to reach her, but the rescue never came. By the fourth day, Sarah began to accept the terrible possibility that she had been abandoned. The extraction protocols that Webb had promised seemed like a cruel joke now. Either the CIA didn't know where she was being held, or they had decided she wasn't worth the risk of an international incident. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had given years of her life to the agency, risking everything in service of her country, and now they had left her to rot in a Chinese prison. The betrayal felt worse than any physical torture they could inflict on her. On the fifth day, Zhang brought her a different kind of offer. Instead of asking questions about her mission, he showed her a tablet computer loaded with intercepted communications between CIA headquarters and the field office in Shanghai. As Sarah read the messages, her hands began to shake. The communications revealed that Director Webb had been in contact with Chinese intelligence for months before her mission. The entire operation had been a setup from the beginning, designed to deliver her into enemy hands along with carefully prepared misinformation that would confuse Chinese intelligence about American operations in the region. But there was more. The messages revealed that Webb had been selling information to the Chinese for over 2 years, providing them with details about American intelligence operations across Asia. Sarah's mission hadn't been about retrieving stolen files at all. She had been the sacrificial lamb in a much larger game. The flash drives she had recovered weren't stolen American intelligence. They were fake files created by Webb himself, filled with outdated information and false identities designed to waste Chinese resources and protect the real American assets in the field.
Sarah was supposed to die in the warehouse, killed while attempting to escape after the Chinese authorities arrived.
Her death would have provided perfect cover for Webb's ongoing betrayal. Zhang seemed to take no pleasure in revealing the truth. He spoke matter-of-factly about how Liu Wei had also been a pawn in the operation, recruited by Webb specifically to make the setup more believable. Liu Wei was already dead, eliminated by Chinese agents who no longer had use for him once Sarah was captured. The tablet also contained financial records showing payments from Chinese intelligence accounts to a series of offshore companies controlled by Webb. The amounts were staggering, enough money to explain how he had been able to afford the expensive house in Virginia and the vacation property in the Caribbean that had raised eyebrows among his colleagues at Langley. Sarah stared at the evidence until her eyes burned from the screen's glare. Everything she had believed about her career, her purpose, her loyalty to her country, had been built on lies. Webb hadn't just betrayed her personally. He had betrayed every agent under his command, every operation he had overseen, every principle the intelligence community claimed to uphold. Zhang closed the tablet and looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. He explained that she had 2 choices. She could continue to protect the man who had sold her out, maintaining her silence until they decided she was no longer useful and made her disappear permanently. Or she could help them expose Webb's network and potentially save the lives of other American agents who are unknowingly walking into traps. The offer was both generous and terrifying. The Chinese weren't asking her to become a double agent or provide them with new intelligence. They were offering her a chance at revenge against the man who had destroyed her life. But accepting their help would mean crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. That night, lying on the metal bench in her cell, Sarah made her decision. Webb had taught her that loyalty was a 2-way street, and he had proven himself unworthy of hers. If the CIA had abandoned her, she would find another way to serve justice. The next morning, when Zhang returned to her cell, Sarah was ready to talk. But she had her own conditions. She wouldn't just provide information about Webb's activities. She would help them build a case so comprehensive that no one would be able to ignore or cover up his crimes. She would help them strike at the heart of his entire operation. Zhang listened to her proposal with growing interest. Sarah wasn't offering to become a Chinese asset. She was offering to become something far more dangerous to Webb and his conspirators. She was offering to become the weapon that would destroy them all. As they shook hands through the bars of her cell, Sarah Chen began planning the most important mission of her career. For the first time in days, she smiled. Webb thought she was dead or broken. He had no idea that his greatest mistake was about to become his worst nightmare. The game was about to change completely, and Sarah would be the one changing the rules. The safe house on the outskirts of Beijing was nothing like the prison cell Sarah had called home for the past week. A modest apartment in a residential complex, it had real windows, comfortable furniture, and a kitchen stocked with actual food. Colonel Jiang had explained that her cooperation had earned her certain privileges, though she understood she was still very much a prisoner, just one with better accommodations. Jiang visited her every morning, bringing tea and updates on their investigation into Webb's network. What had started as Sarah's desire for revenge was quickly evolving into something much more complex. The Chinese intelligence services had been tracking Webb's activities for months, but they had only pieces of the puzzle. Sarah's insider knowledge was helping them see the full picture for the first time. The scope of Webb's betrayal was even worse than Sarah had initially realized. As they went through classified documents and communication records, she discovered that Webb had compromised at least 17 different operations over the past 2 years. Some had resulted in the deaths of local assets who had trusted American intelligence with their lives. Others had led to the capture and imprisonment of foreign nationals who had been working to provide intelligence to the United States. Webb had been particularly careful to avoid operations that involved American citizens, which explained why Sarah's mission had been such an aberration. He had needed a high-value target to cement his relationship with his Chinese handlers, and Sarah's reputation as one of the agency's most effective operatives had made her the perfect sacrificial offering. Working with Jiang and his team was surreal. These were people she had been trained to consider enemies, yet they were showing her more respect and honesty than her own government had. Jiang treated her as a professional equal, seeking her input on operational details and strategic planning. It was a stark contrast to the patronizing attitude she had often encountered from male colleagues at the CIA. The Chinese had assembled a task force specifically to handle the Webb investigation. Besides Jiang, there was Dr. Propelata Liu, a forensic accountant who specialized in tracking international money laundering, and Agent Chen, a cyber warfare expert who had been tracing the digital footprints of Webb's communications with his handlers. Sarah found herself impressed by their professionalism and attention to detail. Dr. Liu had been particularly valuable in mapping Webb's financial network. The money trail was complex, running through shell companies in Panama, investment accounts in Switzerland, and real estate holdings across 3 countries. Webb had been careful, but not careful enough to hide his activities from someone with Dr. Liu's expertise. The total amount he had received from Chinese intelligence was close to $8 million over 2 years. Agent Chen had uncovered something even more damaging. Webb's communications with his Chinese handlers hadn't been limited to intelligence sharing. He had also been providing them with detailed psychological profiles of other CIA personnel, information that could be used to recruit additional assets within the American intelligence community. Webb wasn't just a traitor. He was actively working to build a network of traitors. The profiles made Sarah's stomach turn. Webb had analyzed the financial pressures, personal relationships, and psychological vulnerabilities of dozens of her colleagues. He had identified agents who might be susceptible to blackmail, others who could be turned through financial incentives, and some who might be convinced to cooperate based on ideological arguments about American foreign policy. Sarah recognized many of the names in Webb's files. These were people she had worked with, trained with, trusted with her life during dangerous operations. Webb had been studying them like specimens in a laboratory, looking for weaknesses he could exploit. Some of the profiles contained recommendations for specific recruitment approaches, written in clinical language that made Sarah feel sick. One profile stood out among the rest. Agent David Park, a Korean-American operative who specialized in North Asian operations, had been marked as a high-priority recruitment target. According to Webb's notes, Park was struggling with gambling debts and had expressed private frustrations about being passed over for promotions due to what he perceived as racial bias within the agency. Webb had recommended that Chinese intelligence approach Park with an offer of financial assistance and a promise of more meaningful work. Sarah knew David well. They had worked together on 3 different operations, and she considered him a friend as much as a colleague. The idea that Webb was planning to destroy his life filled her with rage. She made a mental note to find a way to warn him, though she wasn't sure how she could do so without revealing her own situation. Jiang seemed to understand her emotional state as they reviewed the files. He explained that the Chinese government was genuinely interested in exposing Webb's network, not because they opposed espionage in principle, but because Webb's activities had become counterproductive. His information had led them to waste resources on false leads and had made them question the reliability of other intelligence sources. More importantly, Jan revealed that Webb's betrayal had been discovered by accident during a routine security review of Chinese intelligence operations. A discrepancy in financial records had led to questions about payments to foreign assets, which had eventually uncovered the entire network. The Chinese had been conducting their own investigation for months before Sarah's capture had given them the missing pieces. The revelation that even Webb's handlers were questioning his reliability gave Sarah an idea. If the Chinese were already suspicious of him, they might be willing to help her expose him in a way that would be impossible to ignore or cover up. But her plan would require careful coordination and perfect timing. Over the next 3 days, Sarah worked with Zhang's team to develop what they codenamed Operation Mirror. The plan was elegantly simple in concept but complex in execution. They would use Webb's own methods against him, creating a false intelligence operation that would expose his betrayal while simultaneously providing evidence that could be used to prosecute him under American law. The key was a fictional CIA operation that Sarah would help design. According to the false intelligence they would feed to Webb, the CIA had discovered his relationship with Chinese intelligence and was planning to use him as a double agent to feed misinformation to his handlers. The operation would include fake documents, staged communications, and carefully crafted evidence that would make Webb believe he was still in control while actually exposing his entire network. Agent Chen would create digital evidence of the fictional operation, including encrypted communications, financial transfers, and operational reports that would appear to come from genuine CIA sources. Dr. Liu would establish the financial infrastructure needed to make the money trail look authentic. Zhang would coordinate with other Chinese intelligence units to ensure they played their roles convincingly. Sarah's job was to provide the operational details that would make the deception believable. She drew on her years of experience to create mission parameters, security protocols, and contingency plans that would seem genuine to someone with Webb's background. Every detail had to be perfect, because Webb would examine the intelligence carefully before acting on it. The plan required Sarah to do something that felt like the ultimate betrayal of everything she had been trained to believe. She would have to help Chinese intelligence create fake evidence against an American official. But every time she wavered, she reminded herself of the real betrayals Webb had committed, the assets who had died because of his actions, and the colleagues who were still in danger because of his ongoing espionage. Zhang gave her access to secure communications equipment so she could begin implementing the plan. The first step was to establish contact with sources inside the CIA who could unknowingly help validate the false operation. Sarah had to be extremely careful about who she contacted and how she approached them. Because any mistake could expose not just the operation but her own survival, she decided to reach out to Jennifer Walsh, a communications specialist at Langley who had worked on several of Sarah's previous missions. Jennifer was competent, discreet, and had no direct connection to Webb's operations. More importantly, she had always been suspicious of Webb's management style and might be receptive to subtle questions about security protocols. Using encrypted channels that Agent Chen had established, Sarah sent Jennifer a carefully crafted message that appeared to come from a secure CIA facility in Southeast Asia. The message explained that Sarah was working on a classified security review and needed information about recent changes to communication protocols and asset management procedures. Jennifer's response came within 12 hours. She was clearly surprised to hear from Sarah, whom she believed was still on assignment in China, but she provided the requested information without asking too many questions. More importantly, she mentioned in passing that Director Webb had been asking unusual questions about Sarah's mission status and had seemed unusually interested in her communication logs. The information confirmed Sarah's suspicions about Webb's ongoing involvement in her situation. He was still monitoring her status, probably waiting for confirmation of her death or capture before proceeding with other plans. Jennifer's message also provided valuable intelligence about current CIA security procedures that would help make Operation Mirror more convincing. Over the following days, Sarah established contact with 3 other CIA personnel using similar methods. Each contact provided additional pieces of information that helped flesh out the false operation. None of them suspected they were communicating with someone who was supposedly missing in action, and their responses helped validate Sarah's cover story about conducting a security review. The psychological toll of deceiving her former colleagues was enormous. These were people who trusted her, people who would be horrified to learn that she was working with Chinese intelligence. But Sarah forced herself to remember that Webb had betrayed all of them first. She was trying to protect them from further manipulation, even if they would never know it. As Operation Mirror took shape, Zhang shared additional intelligence that made Sarah's mission even more urgent. Webb was planning to expand his network significantly over the next 6 months. According to intercepted communications, he had identified at least 12 additional CIA personnel as potential recruitment targets. Some were already being approached through intermediaries, while others were being set up for blackmail operations. The timeline meant Sarah had a narrow window to expose Webb Before he could do even more damage, Operation Mirror would need to be executed within the next 2 weeks before Webb's next scheduled meeting with his Chinese handlers. After that meeting, new operations would be set in motion that could take years to unravel. Sarah spent her evenings in the safe house writing detailed reports about Webb's methods and the security vulnerabilities he had exploited within the CIA. Zhang had promised that this information would eventually be shared with American authorities, though Sarah understood that the timing and method of that sharing would depend on factors beyond her control. The reports forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about the agency she had served for so long. Webb's betrayals had been possible because of systemic problems within the CIA's oversight and security procedures. Too much authority was concentrated in too few hands, and there were insufficient checks and balances to prevent someone in Webb's position from abusing their access to classified information. Sarah also documented the psychological techniques Webb had used to manipulate his subordinates and identify potential recruitment targets. His methods were sophisticated and deeply unethical, representing a fundamental corruption of the mentorship and leadership roles that should have been his primary responsibilities. Writing these reports was therapeutic in some ways, helping Sarah process the betrayal and begin to understand how she had been manipulated. But it was also deeply disturbing to see the full scope of Webb's activities laid out in systematic detail. He hadn't just betrayed his country, he had betrayed the basic human trust that made intelligence work possible. As the second week of her collaboration with Zhang's team drew to a close, Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and dread about the next phase of Operation Mirror. Everything they had planned depended on Webb reacting predictably to the false intelligence they were about to feed him. If he suspected a trap, the entire operation could backfire catastrophically. Zhang assured her that they had contingency plans for every scenario they could anticipate. But Sarah knew from experience that the most dangerous operations were the ones where everything went according to plan, until suddenly it didn't. In 48 hours, they would begin the most delicate phase of the operation, and there would be no turning back. Sarah Chen looked out the window of the safe house at the bustling streets of Beijing below. Somewhere in Virginia, Marcus Webb was probably sitting in his comfortable office at Langley, believing that his problems had been solved when Sarah disappeared into a Chinese prison. He had no idea that his greatest problem was just beginning. The morning of Operation Mirror's execution, Sarah woke before dawn in the Beijing safe house. Her hands were steady as she dressed, but her mind raced through every detail of the plan they had spent 2 weeks perfecting. Today, Marcus Webb would learn that abandoning her had been the worst mistake of his treacherous career. Zhang arrived at 7 a.m. with coffee and a final briefing packet. Agent Chen had worked through the night putting finishing touches on the digital infrastructure that would make their deception bulletproof. Dr. Payne. Leo had prepared the financial components that would validate the false operation. Everything was ready except for Sarah's nerves. The first phase began with Sarah sending an encrypted message to Webb through back-channel communications that she knew he monitored. The message, ostensibly from a CIA safehouse in Malaysia, reported that Agent Chen had successfully escaped Chinese custody and was requesting immediate extraction. The escape story was elaborate but believable, involving a prisoner transport accident and Sarah's survival training kicking in during the chaos. Webb's response came within 3 hours, faster than Sarah had expected. His message expressed relief at her survival, but also contained subtle questions about her experience in Chinese custody and whether she had been compromised. Sarah could read the paranoia between the lines. Webb was terrified that she might have learned something during her imprisonment that could expose him. Sarah's carefully crafted responses over the next day painted a picture of a traumatized agent who had revealed nothing to her captors but was deeply concerned about security breaches in her original mission. She expressed suspicions that someone with high-level access had compromised the operation without directly accusing Webb. The psychological pressure was designed to make him panic and make mistakes. The psychological manipulation worked better than they had hoped. Within 48 hours, Webb had contacted his Chinese handlers to arrange an emergency meeting. He told them that Sarah Chen was alive and potentially dangerous to their operation. According to the intercepted communications that Agent Chen shared with Sarah, Webb was requesting permission to eliminate her permanently. The Chinese intelligence response was exactly what Sarah and Zhang had orchestrated. Webb's handlers expressed concern about his request and demanded a full briefing on what Sarah might know. They suggested that Webb was becoming reckless and that his usefulness might be coming to an end. The message was designed to increase Webb's desperation and force him into making increasingly aggressive moves. Webb's panic manifested in exactly the ways Sarah had predicted. He began reaching out to other CIA personnel, ostensibly to check on security protocols, but actually to assess whether anyone else suspected his activities. His communications became increasingly erratic, and he started making demands for classified information that were outside his normal purview. Jennifer Walsh, Sarah's communications contact at Langley, sent an encrypted message expressing concern about Webb's recent behavior. She reported that he had been asking unusual questions about personnel files and had requested access to operational reports that weren't related to his current responsibilities. Jennifer's message confirmed that Webb's desperation was becoming visible to his colleagues. This was the opening Sarah had been waiting for. Working with Zhang's team, she crafted a series of communications that would appear to come from a joint CIA-NSA task force investigating security breaches within the intelligence community. The false task force claimed to have detected unusual patterns in classified information access and was requesting cooperation from key personnel in identifying potential compromises. The fake investigation targeted Webb specifically while making it appear that he was just one of several officials being scrutinized. Agent Chen created digital forensic evidence showing that Webb's computer access patterns had triggered automated security alerts. Dr. Liu fabricated financial investigation records suggesting that several CIA officials were being investigated for unexplained income sources. Webb's response to the fake investigation was immediate and panicked. He began deleting files from his computer systems and attempting to contact his Chinese handlers through emergency channels. But Agent Chen had been monitoring all of his communications, and every desperate move Webb made only provided more evidence of his guilt. The decisive moment came when Webb attempted to arrange a meeting with his Chinese contacts to discuss relocating to China permanently. The intercepted communications revealed that he was planning to defect rather than face investigation in the United States. His Chinese handlers, following the script that Zhang had prepared, expressed reluctance to help him and suggested that he had become too much of a liability. Sarah watched the communications intercepts with grim satisfaction. Webb was experiencing the same sense of abandonment and betrayal that he had inflicted on her, but his situation was entirely of his own making. The man who had sold out his country and his subordinates was learning that traitors were never truly trusted by anyone. The final phase of Operation Mirror began when Sarah sent Webb a direct message through encrypted channels. She revealed that she was alive and working with a joint intelligence task force to expose foreign penetration of the CIA. The message included enough accurate details about Webb's activities to make it clear that his betrayal had been discovered, while framing the investigation as an American operation rather than revealing Chinese involvement. Webb's response was a mixture of threats, bribes, and desperate attempts at manipulation. He claimed that Sarah had been brainwashed by her Chinese captors and warned her that going public with unsubstantiated accusations would destroy her career. When those arguments failed, he offered her money and promised to protect her from prosecution if she would help him cover up his activities. Sarah's replies were cold and professional, designed to make Webb understand that his situation was hopeless. She informed him that evidence of his financial crimes and espionage activities had already been presented to the Justice Department, and that arrest warrants were being prepared. She gave him 24 hours to surrender voluntarily before federal agents would come to find him. The psychological pressure finally broke Webb completely. In a series of increasingly frantic messages, he confessed to everything, apparently hoping that cooperation might earn him a lighter sentence. He provided details about his recruitment by Chinese intelligence, his methods for accessing and transmitting classified information, and his attempts to recruit other CIA personnel. But Webb's most damaging admission was his revelation that he wasn't working alone. Two other high-ranking CIA officials had been cooperating with his espionage activities, and a contractor with security clearance had been helping him identify vulnerable personnel for recruitment. The network Sarah had helped expose was larger and more dangerous than anyone had realized. Zhang and his team worked around the clock to document and verify every detail of Webb's confessions. The evidence package they compiled was comprehensive enough to prosecute not just Webb but his entire network. More importantly, it provided enough information to protect the CIA personnel who had been targeted for recruitment but not yet compromised. The challenge now was delivering this evidence to American authorities in a way that would ensure proper action was taken without revealing Chinese involvement in the investigation. Zhang explained that his government was genuinely interested in exposing Webb's network because his activities had become counterproductive to Chinese intelligence goals, but they couldn't afford to admit their role in his capture. Sarah proposed a solution that would serve everyone's interests. She would arrange to escape from Chinese custody in a way that would appear genuine to outside observers. The evidence against Webb would be discovered during her debriefing with American intelligence, presented as information she had gathered during her imprisonment. The Chinese would get credit for being cooperative, without admitting their active role in the investigation. The staged escape took place 3 days later. Sarah walked out of the Beijing safe house carrying carefully prepared evidence hidden in her clothing. Jiang's team had arranged for her to be discovered by American diplomatic personnel at the US Embassy, where she would tell a carefully rehearsed story about her captivity and escape. The embassy staff was genuinely surprised to see her alive. According to their records, Sarah Chen had been missing and presumed dead for over 2 weeks. Her reappearance triggered immediate protocols for debriefing escaped intelligence personnel and assessing potential security compromises. During the debriefing process, Sarah gradually revealed the information about Webb's network, presenting it as intelligence she had gathered by overhearing conversations during her imprisonment and observing documents that her captors had carelessly left where she could see them. The story was believable because it matched the psychological profile of how a skilled intelligence operative might respond to captivity. The evidence against Webb was so compelling that the Justice Department opened a formal investigation within hours of Sarah's debriefing.
Federal agents arrested Webb at his home in Virginia before he could attempt to flee the country.
The 2 CIA officials and the contractor he had implicated were taken into custody the following day. Webb's arrest sent shockwaves through the American intelligence community. The scope of his betrayal was unprecedented in recent CIA history, and the security breaches he had created forced a comprehensive review of personnel security procedures. The 12 CIA operatives he had been planning to recruit were quietly reassigned to positions where they would be less vulnerable to foreign manipulation. Sarah's role in exposing the network made her a hero within the intelligence community, though the full details of her collaboration with Chinese intelligence remained classified. Officially, she had endured imprisonment and torture while gathering crucial intelligence about foreign penetration of American intelligence services. The truth was more complex, that Sarah had made peace with the moral compromises she had been forced to make. The psychological impact of the betrayal and her response to it changed Sarah fundamentally. She could no longer view the intelligence community with the naive loyalty she had once felt. Her experience had taught her that institutions were only as trustworthy as the individuals who ran them, and that sometimes the greatest threats came from within. During the extensive debriefings that followed her return, Sarah was careful to protect the Chinese personnel who had helped her expose Webb's network. She portrayed Jiang and his team as professional but adversarial interrogators who had inadvertently revealed information about Webb while trying to recruit her. The deception protected people who had shown her more honor and respect than her own government initially had. 6 months later, Marcus Webb was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 25 years to life, depending on the extent of their cooperation with the investigation. The security reforms implemented in response to their betrayal strengthened the CIA's counterintelligence capabilities and made similar penetrations much more difficult. Sarah requested reassignment to counterintelligence work, where her experience with betrayal from within gave her unique insights into detecting and preventing future compromises. She developed new training programs for intelligence personnel, focusing on the psychological techniques that hostile services use to recruit assets and the warning signs that might indicate a colleague had been compromised. The experience had taught her that loyalty was indeed a two-way street, but that true loyalty was to principles and people rather than to institutions or authority figures. Webb had betrayed both his principles and his people in pursuit of personal gain. Sarah had chosen to protect both, even when it meant working with supposed enemies to expose the real threats. Jiang sent her a single encrypted message 6 months after Operation Mirror concluded. It contained no operational information, just a simple acknowledgement that their collaboration had served justice better than either of their governments might have managed alone. Sarah never responded to the message, but she kept it as a reminder that honor and professionalism could transcend national boundaries when the stakes were high enough. Sarah Chen had entered that warehouse in Shanghai as a loyal CIA operative, following orders from a trusted superior. She emerged from the Beijing safe house as something more complex and potentially more valuable. An intelligence professional who understood that the most important battles were often fought against enemies who wore friendly faces and carried impressive credentials. The 7 days that had begun with her abandonment in enemy hands had ended with the destruction of the most dangerous espionage network in recent American history. Sometimes the most effective weapons were the ones that the enemy never saw coming, and sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was indeed the one everyone thought was dead.